on the Chakriwal's term is also established. As the gift increases, the size of the social debt increases, and the patron effectively loses control of the relationship. This readily leads to the point where patron is forced into the action that he would not normally perform, and that has not in the best interest of his higher obligation to the organization of which he is a part. The more strategically placed in society the patron is, the greater the ramification. Decisions are made, appointments determined because of pressing obligation formed to Chakri and not as a result of objective determination of what is best at the point. The entire social apparatus then suffers as critical positions are filled and governmental decisions made as a result of Chakri. It is a built-in guarantors of incompetence, inefficiency, and misplaced effort. While there are some positive aspects of the Chakri system, on the whole, Chakri plays a negative role in administrative and political life. The root of this lies in a deep-seated paranoia that is evident in politics and bureaucracy. The fear that someone there is doing something adverse to one's own well-being, particularly in using the Chakra system of information transfer to plant rumors and lies. As considered above, although fatalism, there is no belief in genuine personal control over one's future, and certain elements have to be constantly appeased, either powerful supernatural elements or the powerful administrative ones. If things to do progress smoothly, or worse, things start to happen unfavorably, then the tendency is to blame the deceitful action of others. This action can be at any level of the organization, in a horizontal relation to the paranoid or vertically subordinate or superordinate. The remedy is counteraction using the same chakra system to undermine the credibility of one's imagined opponents by spreading gossips and fabrication against them. If the imagined enemy is at a superordinate level, Chakri allows one to bypass that level and appeal to an even more senior levels. Consequently, no one is safe from these self-perpetuating paranoid machination. The situation becomes archetypical of a classical intrigue, the bane of many formal societies. Such intrigues tends to be characteristics of the downward phase of a society, not a prelude to its efflorescence. Nepali society cannot develop as long as the Chakri characterizes its organizational life. During the Rana days, people bragged about their being a Chakriwals, say the certain Samsher Jang Bahadur Rana. Today, Nepal has officially adopted democracy. Therefore, people do not brag about being a Chakriwal, but those who have ambition and are interested in self-promotion know that this cannot be achieved without Chakri. The hierarchic attitude of the people encourages Chakri in two ways. First, it is considered important to reach ever higher level in the hierarchy, which cannot be achieved without Chakri. Secondly, once one believes in the hierarchic order of the things, it is not considered lowering of one's position to be servile to individual who stands on the hierarchy of the social or political ladder. Individualism and social relations. As seen in the earlier discussion of kinship, class and caste groups, most Nepalese are embodied within a certain complex social structure. To a large extent, their self-identity is determined by the social roles they assume as a member of social groups, and their social orientation might be defined as traditionally being group-oriented or collectivist. This traditional group's orientation is being gradually replaced by the development of individualistic orientation, a development which is being made at the cost of community and national consciousness. The individualism developing among the younger generation in Nepal is not yet a mature one as is found perhaps in the West, but has a strong element of egotism. More than 100 years ago, Alexis de Tocqueville commented, individualism is a noble expression to which a noble ideals has given birth. Our fathers were only acquainted with egotism. Egotism is a passionate and exaggerated love of self, which leads a man to connect everything with his own person and to pretend himself to everything in the world. Individualism is a mature and calm feeling which disposed even each member of the community to sever himself from the mass of his fellow creatures and to draw apart from his family and his friends, so that after he has thus performed a little circle of his own, he willingly leaves society at large to itself. Nepali individualism operates largely at a more primitive, egotistic stage. To some extent, this is a consequence of the preoccupation with maintaining caste purity. The upper caste people think in terms of one's individual position vis-a-vis the Matwali people. They have to keep in mind constantly a number of things when going outside the home. They have to take care of the food they eat, who cooks it, and what kind of food it is. They have to be concerned with who they touch or are in close proximity with. This keeps them constantly on guard while forcing the certain ego focus. In the last chapter, reference was made to other factors which contributes to the sense of social estrangement among high caste families. Bound are by birth at a high level of spiritual purity, but this is a purity that others can easily contaminate. At a certain age, children in such families are taught that they are different from others and must keep their distance from them because they are defiling. They grow up being unable to play with other children and do not tame the lifestyle of other children. In many areas of Nepal, they live in a periphery of society, descended from immigrant families that are forced to move in every generation in order to find new religious client. Because the caste system has never really become established in Nepal outside the Kathmandu Valley, the dependence on caste has ensured that they remain disembodied from a real social fabric of the country. Priests find it very difficult to develop close relation and working respect for others, qualities necessary for effective social relation. Their interpersonal relationships are not of the same quality as that of other castes, and this is apparent to other Nepalese who deals with them. They operate much more from a position of enforced individualism. They find it difficult to develop a sense of the other, since the other is inherently different and strange. Such people can be good rhetoricians and the general welfare of society, but find it impossible to work concretely with a group to help others. This robs them of gentleness and kindness of others as well as a sense of humor. This is not at all true of the non-caste ethnic groups. They have grown up as a part of society and their position are not dependent on caste purity but have other strong social and political antecedents. It does not particularly make matters to them if they touch and are touched by others. They can be developed to the stage of full reciprocity with others, and the other's response to this. In bureaucratic relations, also it is an ethnic individuals who can work cooperatively and emphasize and empathetically, the high caste individual uses a different style focusing on erudition and punditry with a prevalent system of education and the principles of recruitment at the civil service. It is high caste people who are becoming more prevalent in administrative bureaucracy and not the ethnic group member. This is this has severe implication for the efficiency of administration because very few people treat high positions with responsibility as a duty to the society at large. Many see a high position as a reward, something to be enjoyed. In contrast, individuals from ethnic groups act cooperatively and are not socially or psychologically as isolated from their fellow citizens. This has been described in several ethnographic studies conducted among many ethnic groups in Nepal. There would be no one to help cultivate or plow their land or give support to them during the house building if they did not have mutual respect and trust to their fellow villagers. The same attitude, when applied in administrative offices, tend to make higher officers of ethnic background more successful in achieving the goals set for them. Group behavior and aftermarket. There are few Nepalese who are willing to leave their own secure inner circle, let alone be an individualist in Tocqueville sense. When we consider the sense of belonging which an individual requires in order to feel safe and secure, we also include a logical consequence of these needs to constantly maintain one's own inner circle. Nepalese make a strong distinction between us and them. People who do not belong to one's own inner circle are perceived as being non-persons, and there is no real concern over what happens to such unrelated individuals. Time and effort is exhausted in taking care of one's own people so that there is little energy or inclination left to be concerned about non-persons. The distinction between the group us and the rest are us, they manifest itself in every walk of social, cultural, and political and economic life. Everything inside the circle of us is predictable, and the rest is external and unpredictable. Therefore, there is a constant need to maintain the boundary. The maintenance of the inner group is achieved in a number of ways. Gathering people together for a joystick festival occasionally is one. The rural areas among the various people funeral rites, anniversaries and feasts are the main occasions which help foster a sense of solidarity with the inner group, while recently in urban areas invitations to wedding feasts and the distribution of greeting cards during the Dasar festivals and the Nepali New Year are newly found occasions on which to define the consistency of one's own circle. In recent years, even some foreigners, such as volunteers, university and college students living with Nepalese families, have been included by Nepalese within their circle of Afnamanche. They receive more intimate and close behavior, which a career professional working at official and formal level would never receive. Afnamanche is a term used to designate one's inner circle of associates. It means one's own people and refers to those who can be approached whenever a need arises, and the strength and weakness of anyone is measured in terms of the quality and quantity of the circle of Afnamanche he is a part of. Afnamanche is a critical Nepali institution. It is integrally connected with the smooth functioning of society. For example, a bank tellers takes longer to cash a check if customer is a non-person, but make a special effort if the customer is a member of his circle, and therefore after Manche, the reputation of bank becomes secondary importance as the maintenance of the fence around one's own circle of primary. The same thing is true if all government and corporation offices. The persistence of ethnic or regional identity is a manifestation of the need to have one's own circle clearly defined and maintained permanently. By inference, ethnic, regional, or cultural identity would collapse only when a new circle of class, profession, or residential areas are created. Within Nepal, there is no point in arguing that one set of Aftermanche circles is better or worse than another. The only accountable quality is an individual is the need for membership of a circle is in question. Academic qualification, training background, working discipline, integrity of character, and other such attributes are not as important or helpful as the sense of belonging to a particular circle. Many an executive tends to recognize his subordinate on the basis of membership of a circle rather than on the basis of personal qualification, skills, and other attributes of capability. A member of one's own circle is naturally preferred even without particular capacity of to perform in some organizational role. The most important asset for anyone is not what you know but who you know. In Nepal, the people who display distinctly different behavior towards a person or a non-person are usually those who have many elaborate ways and means of defining such circles compared to other people in Nepal. The Niwas of Kathmandu shows this most markedly as they have many circles and each group belongs to several uh, at least the same time. These circles are defined by caste, by profession, by Guti Guild membership, and the later include the Rotary Club, Lions Club, Leo's Club, Ryukai, and so on. This is a natural for a community which has been living in compact urban setting for more than 500 years. Most individuals living within the community have little interest in non-persons because there are too many of them as far as they are concerned. Buddhist Nepal tends to have even more of such obligations reserved exclusively for their people than Hindu Srestras who have recently come out of their defined traditional circles and have been stretching their boundaries to include other non-Persians inside them, thus converting them into a status of an aftermanche. Nepalese will never be willing to knock down the existing circles of identity unless they have options of crossing the lines from one circle to another. And this will not be possible for the vast majority of people, except for those in the middle classes in the urban areas with a modern education. Nepal is too strong and ascriptive rather than an achievement-oriented society to allow such mobility, but the determination of membership in a particular circle is not the simple outcome of caste or ethnicity. Caste relates to a more formal structure, and while it is still important in imposing restriction on social movement, such restrictions are not the same as one finds, for example, in parts of Gangetic Basin. To some extent, this is because Nepali caste only seems to adopt the nature of the class structure rather than pure caste structure. Of most importance is the fact that, except for the Bahmans, pollution is not attached to the caste in the way it is in India, and then there is a degree of personal interaction among the castes and would never be tolerated where pollution is an important factor. In some circumstances, Untouchables Act is in the capacity of temple priest. Caste then is not an absolute barrier to inclusion or exclusion in the more informal interpersonal circles or group being considered here. If we look carefully into the past, we find many instances where people have moved out of one circle of reference and into another to migration, social mobility, and political achievement. This has been possible in the urban areas where there are opportunities to be availed. One constantly tries to stretch one's own circle by making a bigger ring and include more potential resources inside it. The increasing practice of inviting individuals to social occasions have such as dinners or picnic parties or to wedding is becoming an accepted norm for enticing someone into entering a circle for the first time. This is largely practiced in the urban areas among modern educated people. Note and references. In Nepal, this is usually known as Arkaku Kura Launu or Chukli Launu. Chapter 5 Politics and Government. After the unification of Nepal in the 18th century, the concern of the government was with consolidating its rule and with battling against rebellious groups with the emphasis on control. Its form was largely military. The Sugoi Treaty of 1816, which fixed the political boundaries of the nation, helped provide the sense of security that allowed the government to be less preoccupied with military affairs and to turn to other things. Much of the effort of the ruling class turned towards the cultivation of personal ambitions, as the nobles and courtiers embarked on a regime of intrigue, a practice prevalent in Kathmandu through the later part of the preceding Mulla period. The winners of these intra-palace machinations was Dor Bahadur Rana, who came to power in 1847 with the ill-famed court massacre when all his potential rivals were eliminated. The king had the formal title of Sripat Maharaj Dhiraj, and within the status hierarchy continued through the Rana period. In this position, though divorced from any real power, the Ranas developed another position of Sri Teen Maharaja, which was the real center of power. This position of Ranas has been interpreted as that of Prime Minister, though in more strict terms it is really a graded rank of kingship. Jung Bahadur was given the title of Maharaja of Kaski and Lamjung principalities, which were independent prior to their being integrated under the unified Kingdom of Nepal in 18th century. The Ranas then were kings of their own rights, though of less formal rank than Sahas. The family rule of the Ranas continued for over 100 years, from 1847 to 1950. The orientation of the Ranas was towards furthering the fortunes of their family, not of the country, and patriotism was even regarded suspiciously as a threat to their personal interests. Thus, the Rana had a strong personal motivation in their work, combined with effective control over their administrative resources, which were discreet and manageable. In furthering their family interest, the Ranas were able administrators, and there remains in some quarter a nostalgic regards for their apparent competence. The certainty of their authority had much to do with their effectiveness, and the method for gaining access to this authority were certain established, operating with the assistance of Avnamancha and Chakri. Rivals within the Rana family were controlled by their de facto banishment to the provinces under the guise of being awarded governorships. Non-Rana rivals had to be handled in other ways, especially because their potential power bases existed in their provincial areas. It was to control these non-Ranas rivals as well as the discontrolled junior Ranas that the Chakra system was developed and formalized. Suspect nobles were required to be in close proximity to the Ranas and to formally and publicly attend the Ranas at certain predetermined hours each day. By being restrained to this manner and restricted from traveling anywhere outside the Kathmandu, these rivals would not be able to build up their power bases elsewhere in the country. Visiting each other at night within the Kathmandu was made impossible by imposition of a curfew. The practice of chakri was adopted with a different intent. It signified both respect and willingness to be seen as personally committed to the chakri patron and was used at all levels of the Rana administration. Although the Rana rule was primarily a family-run business, with little interest on the welfare of the country, there were exceptions. After the First World War, the Rana Prime Minister Sri Maharaja Chandra Samse introduced the first real attempts at modernizations. A college, a small railroads near the Indian border, a hydroelectric power plant in Kathmandu Valley, a few miles of road, hospitals in several parts of the country, and the first street lighting in Kathmandu, later taking the cue from the shortage of supplies during the Second World War. Did the Samsha establish several factories for the production of basic consumer goods in Eastern Tarai. With the end of the war and the recuperation of traditional supplies elsewhere, prices dropped and the infant industry in the Tarai quickly folded. Thus, at the time of the Rana overthrow, Nepal was still, in many ways, a medieval Oriental state. A change occurred during the reign of late King Tribhuvan. Encouraged by Indian independence and a sense of change experienced everywhere, especially in the third world countries, authority was placed in the hand of people most active in the campaign against the Rana. They operated with the active encouragement and indirect participation of the new Indian government. Several dozen of political parties were formed, representing views from extreme left to extreme right. These parties were essentially lobbying bodies. The parliament was formed with members nominated by the king upon recommendation of the political parties, but it was only an advisory body to the king and the cabinet. Real power resided with the cabinet and the ministries and the civil service bureaucracy, the model for which was imported from India. The system was not inherently stable, with the various opposition parties provoking factional strife, which led to mass demonstration and strikes. Fatalistic values are also compromised the possibility of an effective political system whose primary aim was to elevate the quality of life in the country to modern standards. People had yet to learn that things do not come by God's design, even though the teachings of the Pandit continued to tell them to do so. While the desirable for the material benefits of modernism was increasing, there was no corresponding increase in strategic activity to realize these desires. By 1958, the system had even innovated. In 1959, the general election was held to create a democratic parliament. The election was won by Nepali Congress Party (NCP), who had over 70% of the votes and consequently formed the cabinet. There was an immediate reaction of today's. Many felt that the NCP was not acting in the interest of the country. There was a widespread unrest in different parts of the country against the NCP and consequently against the government. In 1960, the late King Mahendra, who remained at all times the ultimate power in Nepal, decided that this party system was not going to work and was not the appropriate instrument to facilitate rapid development. He declared all parties illegal, closed down the parliament, arrested and imprisoned all cabinet members then in Kathmandu, and took the government into his own hands. An advisory council was formed, primarily with the defectors of NCP, which then acted as a cabinet. The constitution was amended in 1962 and the first national panchayat formed, with the representative elected from districts. The election did not involve a universal franchise but was restricted to individuals invited by district governors who voted by a show of hand. The national panchayat at this stage was mainly an advisory body. The king continued to nominate his own cabinet ministers. The late 60s, the king again created the position of Prime Minister as the chairman of the cabinet, with with other appointments rotating. In response to political existences in the country, throughout the civil service remained intact and effectively ran the country. In 1980s, there was a referendum to determine whether the Nepali government should operate. Under this Third Amendment constitution, the ultimate power of the government resided with the king. The constitution provided adult franchise for general election to the Rashtriya Panchayat, National Assembly, the supreme legislative body of the country every 5 years. 112 representatives were elected from 75 districts, and a maximum of 18 were nominated from among the academicians, representative of the special class organization, youth, ex-military, adult, women, peasant, labor, and from among ethnic minorities. The class organizations were a special feature because there was no party system. Their groups were minted took after the interest of their members. Membership in any class group was exclusive of membership in any other, with the youth group representing all those between 20 to 40. So the officials of these organizations were elected by their members, and these elections were at times more intense than the Panchayat election, in part because the electorate for the class organization was nationwide and not local. The Prime Minister was elected by the two-thirds majority in the National Panchayat, and once he was approved by the King, he formed cabinet from the member of National Panchayat, which remained in principle directly responsible to the National Panchayat. However, in reality, this principle, as embodied in the constitution, was frequently ignored by the suit the interest of the people in power. By 1988, it was clear that the people with strong authoritarian tendencies were beginning to strangle the democratic process of the Panchayat system. This antagonized even the people within the Panchayat system who supported the liberal democratic process. Consequently, the people under the leadership of Nepali Congress and United Front of the various factions of the Communist Party rebelled against the partyless Panchayat system, which collapsed under the pressure of the very strong popular uprising in April 1990. The country under the Panchayat regime was divided into the 5 development zones for the purpose of planning and execution of development projects. The entire country was also divided into 14 political zones, Anchal, headed by 14 commissioners nominated by the king. The zonal commissioner Anchaladis were responsible primarily for political activities, including the maintenance of law and order and overall responsibilities for the development of zone. They maintained the liaison between local government and government bodies and the national government. This practice has been discontinued, and the zonal commissioners' positions have been dissolved since May 1990. The country is also divided into a total of 75 administrative districts, each headed by a CDO, a regular civil servant. The districts are responsible for the building and maintenance of such things as roads and bridges and for distribution of government grants to the different villages. Each district administration consists of branch offices of the ministries of local development, transportation, communication, education, forestry, agricultural, water resources, finance, industry, commerce, and some other departments. Technical ministries are represented by technical personnel such as engineers, agricultural experts, and medical people. The district secretariat comprises under the ministry officials at the district level and various offices of civil engineer, health assistant, and other professional government employees necessary for running of district operations. Below the district level, each of the 75 districts has a member of village panchayat, which are formed on the basis of population. The village population averaging between 3,000 to 5,000 warrants the creation of a village panchayat. In addition to this, there are 33 towns, the biggest being that of Kathmandu. Some of the bigger towns have municipalities which take care of the development and maintenance of public facilities such as local roads, temples, the local water supply, public buildings, urban development, education, and collection of taxes. There is a Supreme Court with judges appointed by the king, and there are also journal courts in all 14 districts and district courts in all 75 districts. Village councils are authorized to act as courts of justice on disputes of local nature and petty feuds. Except for criminal cases, until 1963 the law decreed differential punishment for different cases by gender for people of different socio-political background, but today everyone is equal in the eye of law. This complex administrative structure has developed only during the past couple of decades, especially to aid development and for the modernization of the country. An administrative machinery of this size requires vast resources for its maintenance. The investment for resources of development of such a large bureaucratic apparatus significantly preceded the development of technical economic infrastructure that was really needed for genuine development, and the contribution of such an apparatus to real development has been negligible. The government has developed a certain kind of organicity so that it has a life of its own, is self-perpetuating, with its internal dynamism largely insensitive to its environment and functions that it should be fulfilling for society at large. Most things get done by default or by process where strategic planning and coordinated action play little part. Overseeing the general development of the country is the National Planning Commission, whose purpose is to develop the 5-year plan that would methodically and efficiently modernize the country, bringing a standard of living to that of developed Asian countries by the turn of the century. The NPC is directly under the Prime Minister as its chairman, and its 5 or 6 members, mostly economists, statisticians, and geographers, are sworn in by the king upon the recommendation of Prime Minister. In practice, the 5-year plan documents is worth very little. Roads and schools do get built, but most often in areas not designated by the NPC. They are not constructed in consultation with the representative of foreign aid organizations who provide many of the resources to be used, and this leads to disparity in the perceived priorities of the development between the foreign aid donors and the NPC. The NPC also tends to ignore the people, local institutions, and even the ministries once they have made their initial recommendation. Issues and disagreement are aired only at the end of planning, and there is no continuing dialogue between the interested parties in the stage of preceding planning. The plan is a legally binding directive which obliges the designated ministries to put it into effect, but failures to implement the plan is excused with the argument that NPC is insensitive to real need of geographic circumstances that qualify the plausibility of many projects. The National Development Council was introduced by the king to air disputes on planning and with the purpose of making efforts at conciliation. But it became merely an exercise in self-aggrandizement before the king and used as an opportunity to demonstrate personal worth with the hope of administrative advantage. To better understand how policy is actually formulated and development projects are taken, I will give a brief overview of one particular development concern, the building of roads. Road construction is the responsibility of Roads and Transportation Ministry, which divides the task into district level activities for local roads and national level activities for highways. Typically, the ministry makes a simple determination that so many miles of road will be built at the national level and so many of the thousands, so many at the local level. National level roads usually have to be built with foreign resources. Often the foreign aid groups have different and more economically realistic perspective on what roads should be built and where. Consequently, for most of the national road except the East-West Highway, priorities are set by foreign aid consideration. Political consideration has also played an important role. The People's Republic of China, for example, has in the past provided funds and engineering expertise for the construction of national roads, which has been opposed by the Indian government on the ground that such roads would merely provide easier access for Chinese armies in any invasion of India. Chinese aid has had to be redirected. Then, to accommodate Indian fears, India has also provided funds and expertise for the construction of other roads closer to her border. Local district roads were built on local initiative, usually as a result of direct and village level decision, in consultation with the national level representative of the area until its beginning of 1990s when the National Panchayat was dissolved. Villages were previously connected by the system of walking trails and usually well-used trails were transformed into roads. The primary motivation was that the facilitating the transportation of goods. Some roads could be built with no outside assistance through the cooperative action of members of the affected village, but some roads required resources beyond those available to villages. Bridges require exotic materials, cement, iron, and engineering skills. Paving is expensive. Getting the required resources is a matter of aggressiveness and persistence. If there is an aftermarket engineer and resources at the district level, these are used. If aftermarket cannot solve the problem, the village and district representative approach the ministry at one or two levels, depending upon who they are and who they have access to. The first level is that of engineers who operate essentially at the district level, but the districts have very small funds to disperse and often cannot be accommodating to such requests. Then the head of the department are approached, usually called chief engineers. If chief engineers is not forthcoming, then the secretary of the road and transportation or the ministry is approached, and both aftermarket and chakri are used. In submitting their request, the local authorities are obliged to guarantee that the unskilled labor will be provided locally. Roads most often do get built regardless of whether they are included in the NPC's plan or have been thought of after the plan has been formulated. If the petition is submitted after the formulation of the plan, work will begin and may be completed. Still, the secretary submits the petition for each road, such roads for consideration in the next plan. The initiative for the making of the roads, the lobbying for resources, and the close surveillance of operation until it is complete are all undertaken at the local level, by agencies outside the ministry. The ministry bureaucracies. There was a bureaucracy in Rana period, but it was inconsequential to the one developed in the post-Rana period based on the Indian model. It absorbed most of the Rana administration except for the highest run officials. The early administrators of the post-Rana period emulated the practices of the Rana administration. The decision-making power were concentrated in a few, and after Mancha and Chakri were still the established way of doing things. The presence of Chakri was one of the ways of making authority evident for new administrators, and Chakri became institutionalized as an internal aspect of all ministries. Meanwhile, new patterns of bureaucratic behavior were imported and ritualized. In order to justify the new position, bureaucratic activities were created. For those responsible for planning, the most popular of these new self-justifying activities was the meeting. These meetings and conferences built up the formal atmosphere for continuous debate and speculation, and the stage for self-aggrandizement. Punditry was thereby readily accommodated within the modern bureaucratic status, but punditry is an expertise of a mind and has little to do with strategic planning and transformation of plans into actualities. Being at a meeting has become a metaphor for being busy and hard at work for administrators and civil servants. As the level of responsibility increases within the administration, fewer decisions are actually made. Making decisions can be a very risky business. By making decisions, you can make mistakes, sometimes hurt the interest of an individual who is, in all likelihood, is a member of powerful Afnamanchi circle. Doing something means taking responsibility for it, and when something is done badly, then failure is attributed to incompetence. To keep an administrative position for as long as possible, the best way strategy is to act as little as possible so that the danger of dismissal is diminished. A general rule of working in such a bureaucracy is the lower you are, the more active you are, because you have a high aspiration of working hard to realize them. The higher you are, the greater you are at the risk, and the less you do. The variation of not doing work is to pass it up to the higher level. Decisions are constantly being deferred to top, which until recently was ultimately the king. Alternatively, decisions can be passed on to a committee, thereby diffusing responsibilities through collective action. Other practices derived from the sense of fatalism include recourse to such things as astrology, shamanic divining, oracular practices, and priestly services. Such practices are evident at all levels of government, though they are done discreetly and privately. Sometimes there are jobs that have a pressing need to be completed, and such times they do get done quickly, but most things happen casually rather than by conscious design. The central rule of the king. The Nepali word for the government is Sarkar, and the same who is used as address and is reference to the king. Sarkar is equivalent to the English Your Majesty. Thus, king and the government are equivalent to in the Nepali cultural historical context. The king embodies government. The idea that the king and government are synonymous pervades Nepali attitudes towards government, politics, and maintenance of the law and order. The relationship between king and the government is solidly reinforced by another relationship, which is equally important. This is the relationship between the king and the state. The Nepali word for the king and states are Raja and Rajya, respectively. The word Rajya is derived from the word Raja. So state, government, and king are aspects of the one and the same thing. They are inseparable. The relationship between the king and the people has always been harmonious, and in large part because of the people treats the king as a father figure who protects the interests of his children. In fact, the king is also often called father. The father connection is an important one, derived ultimately from the pervasive paternal dependency that so characterizes a certain section of Nepali society. Such dependency ensures a high degree of stability in Nepal, at least with regards to the people relations with king. It also permeates the vertical structure of society and administrative hierarchy within the government, which might be best characterized as an overlapping series of paternal relations. Genuinely, genuine authority is always the king, who thus becomes the central focus for Chakri. Throughout the various attempts are establishing alternative form of political assembly, from pseudo-parliamentary to Onsite system, and in the various experiments with democracy, the king has always remained the ultimate power, and at times has been forced to exercise his power. But while having such power, the king has always been autocratic. Since the runners, each king has been favorable to democratic attempts and has intervened only at the point of crisis. Such much as of father world is also he is also repository of shifted responsibilities, particularly from the administrative bureaucracy. During the Panchayat regime, an important practice of senior civil servant who constitute collectively the working arms of the government was to establish as a close relationship with the king as possible. The observation made by Rose and Fisher about the administrative machinery 2 decades ago still reflects the situation today. The decision-making process continues to be highly confused, and the locus of responsibility for decision is often difficult to understand. The large administrative structure and the more complex nature of the problem with which the government is now concerned with is virtually impossible for a king to function effectively in the style of Rana Prime Minister, but is essential that is what is expected of him. No other official is prepared, or indeed is in a position to assume responsibilities for even comparatively minor matters, which are more safely by pushed in the place for the final decision. While this is not feasible, the tendency is to form ad hoc committees within the central secretariat to consider a question, thus reducing individuals' responsibility but slowing down the decision-making process. The deep-seated paternal dependency of a Nepali character is really that cannot be ignored. The structure features of a national character with have consequences on ideal form of social organization of a culture. Alien social organization can really accommodate these peculiarities of a national character and may result in the kind of conflict experienced by Nepal when it introduced the Western Parliament system through India in the 50s. With time, the structure of these important organizations has to be adapted to the national character. An example of is the peculiarity of Chinese adaptation of the communist system. In Nepal, any imported political system must be adopted to accommodate the demand of paternal dependency. When an attempt was made to introduce a parliamentary system in the 50s, something else evolved in its place, the Panchayat system. But to a large extent, this too remained merely a formal political structure, and as was proven by the recent revolution, a formal structure is not necessarily the most appropriate one. While the Panchayat system was evolving, so too was the extensive informal and absolute corrupt political apparatus around the king. The king had his own personal secretariat at the palace, and each secretary acted as a link between the concerned ministry and the king. Formally, these secretaries had no power. Informally, the secretaries were more powerful than the civil secretariat and ministries, and were often deferred to by individual bureaucrats, at least until the Panchayat system collapsed in April 1990. Essentially, they acted on ombudsman, cementing the inadequacy of the Panchayat bureaucratic system. The largest number of chakriwals in the country came to this secretary. King Birendra developed the practice of moving himself to a different part of the country. With this, with his secretaries, for 1 month every year during the winter, the king was thus made visible to the people throughout the country, and the king was thus made visible to the people throughout the country, and in attending to these problems while traveling, demonstrated to them that he was the real force in Nepal. Some common person, for the common person, the new national panchayat remained in abstraction. During this regional visit, the king's secretaries met with regional Sakriwal. This has had a significant impact on development of this region. On such visit, a minister in waiting for national panchayat was always present with the king to carry the order of the king to the cabinet should go so desire. Sometimes he took the prime minister or particular ministers or secretaries with him. The net impact of this was to demonstrate that to the people that the king was really concerned for their well-being. He could really do things for them. National Panchayat and Ministry deferred to him and were of secondary importance. Democracy in Nepal. No sensible person would deny that the most important aspect of democracy is equality, is opportunity and right. Is equality in opportunities and rights. Currently in Nepal, it is educated high caste who have most of the opportunities, and their natural tendency, consciously and unconsciously, is to protect these privileges. The majority of people need a democracy in which their interests are constantly considered and expanded. While the stratified hierarchy of the caste system is abolished completely, but since the common people are not the one who claim of a political party, the political power, and so little interest in the tool of aggressive class action, either by being member of political parties or through strike. They are misunderstood by the educated cities who consider politics are the decisive factor in social change. The term democracy covers a multitude of political forms. For some, it connotes particular kind of determined social action. Some associate it with lofty ideals and liberty and equality and believe it means emulating the activists of French Revolution to topple the exclusive privileges to fervent mass movement and rallies. All confine it to party politics, where minority interests are identified, consolidated, represented, and defended against those of other minorities. But the path to social change must not only accommodate but should strongly resonate with cultural requirements of the people, and many of the political forms had had been promoted in Nepal reflect social organization that are essentially alien. The kind of democracy envisioned by some of the successful would require the elimination of the social fabric of the Nepali society and its replacement by psychology to act in an independent, aggressive, self-aggressive fashion. Democracy in Nepal must recognize the collective orientation of people as well as the ubiquitous and multiple forms of paternal dependency. This paternal dependency could readily lead to the development of a polity which is essentially antagonistic to the genuine interest of the people because it is supportive of various forms of authoritarianism and of the cumbersome form of government by bureaucracy that has currently evolved. While the democratic needs of the people have to be met, their need for beneficent guidance and nurturance has also to be realized. Ultimately, authority in Nepal must reside with the power which can recognize both the needs and can be committed to the genuine interests of the people. Unless Nepal is able to maintain an institution which can develop this kind of commitment, it would be extremely difficult job to lead a plural society through the process of rapid growth and economic development. At the same time, a constant evaluation of progress made towards the desired goal is an absolute necessity to remain on course. An immediate requirement is undisturbed effort at economic development and an expansion of proper educational facilities. The country could not pick up any developmental momentum after Rana family rule because of the lack of genuine leadership and predisposition of those in power of authority to slip back into the old ways of doing things. Since then there has been experiment with different type of political system, but people have much to learn before a representative system can work properly. And in particular, they needs to learn to bear responsibility and work hard to develop skill and self-confidence for self-government. For long, for a long time to come, the position of the monarch as a symbol of unity and national sovereignty will be very important and crucial in the development of a national society which comprise so many different ethnic, cultural, and linguistic communities. Nepalese will have to learn to shoulder responsibilities, develop an open mind to respect each other as equals, and help bring about a change in their basic attitude of fatalism, so that they have an appreciation of the fact that things change only as a result of hard and determined individual action instead of blaming others for not shouldering responsibility and waiting for someone else to act on their behalf. They need to try to do things for themselves. For generations, Nepalese have been promised the beautiful imaginary land of Swarga, where everything comes true miraculously without having to make any efforts, and where they can reserve a place for themselves by paying an advance to the priest who acts like reservation clerks to the travel agency. The worst part is that the job is not carried out by a person who was trained to be priest, but a bound individual who considers it his privilege by being born in a bound family. Democratic culture cannot be institutionalized simply by the preaching of erudite scholars. They must adopt this as a way of life for themselves to begin with. Only when Nepalese have internalized responsibility for themselves and accepted the need to liberate themselves from cultural mores that threatens loss of status for working productively, will the groundwork be established for a different and more developed form of democracy. Note and references. For example, many people, when they suffer injustice, use the word alas. The king cannot see it, and the god sees it, does not speak. Raja देख्दैन, देख्ने देवता बोल्दैन. Chapter 6. Education. The Ministry of Education in Nepal is currently one of the largest ministries in the government. With a large budget, an investigation into its operation will provide an opportunity for a close examination of the operation of government in Nepal. Through it, we can get an idea of working in Nepali bureaucracy and how policy is formulated and applied. Education itself is also of critical importance in the study of development because it is through education that the nation's manpower resources are improved and various skills necessary for development acquired. The chapter begins with the consideration of traditional attitude towards education in Nepal and examines the development of the educational system since the Rana period. Education in the past. In earlier days, particularly during the Lichavi period, Kathmandu Valley society clearly had a substantial body of highly skilled and professional laborers, including engineers and architects. Their skills were demonstrated not only within Nepal but also in Tibet. These accomplishments were acquired in relatively sophisticated educational institutions, perhaps modeled on the great universities of the plains at Taxila, Pataliputra, and Nalanda. During this period, most of the institutions of higher education were Buddhist, and perhaps the Nepali institutions were Buddhist as well. Buddhist institutions generally seem to have been well supported by the Lichavi government. Today, no direct evidence for such institution exists, but given the power of significance of Nepali society at the time, the fact that Nepal was a source of engineering, metallurgy, and architectural skills, they probably did exist along with an indigenous scientific and literary heritage. Tibetan and Chinese documents from that period also suggest such probability. The advent of Sankaracharya in the 11th century seems to mark a turning point for these educational resources in Nepal. Buddhist institutions were attacked and the books of their works destroyed, with widespread book burning. This included not only religious texts, which may have been seen as rivaling Sankaracharya's version of Saivitic thought, but also other secular literature, works of grammar and dictionaries. Few written works other than administrative edicts carved in stone exist from this period. Nepali literary history begins for us only in the 14th century. If a written literary and scientific heritage exists in Lichavi period, it must have been destroyed in Sankaracharya's conflagration, and we might also expect that Buddhist and other non-Saivitic educational institutions were destroyed at the same time. Certainly, nothing survives of them. While this surmise of an early institutional educational apparatus is highly speculative, it is probable. Its form would have been determined by Buddhist organizational practices, which tended towards creating regulated schooling system and some some centers of higher education, usually connected with the monasteries. The Hindu system of education was quite different from that of Buddhist. The model was that of a gurukul, with prime emphasis on the guru, teacher, and shiksha, pupil relationship. Often, as was the case in Nepal, the role of guru was assumed by the father, thereby compounding the special qualities of the father-son relationship. Education traditionally consisted of learning rituals, prayers, and the reading of religious texts. To be educated, one has to be born into a caste where such an education was appropriate. Education ceased to be the means of acquiring practical skills. Its connection was productive with productive activities such as with engineering application disappeared and was replaced with this more narrow orientation towards ritual life. With time, education ceased to have relevance for the majority of the population who had to work for a living. Eventually, Sanskrit schools or Sanskrit Pathshala were introduced for high caste children, and the father's role as a teacher was diminished, though not eliminated. Fathers still taught their children up to their entry to Sanskrit Pathshala, and often children were literate in the Sanskrit by the time they went to school. Most high caste children went to such schools, though in some instances the tradition of the father as guru persisted. The Sanskrit Pathshalas were funded out of Guti or the grants and gifts donated to them by the government, both the government and devout private parties. The nature of these grants allowed much independence from the government, so that the Pathshalas were autonomous bodies. Pathshala resources varied with size of Guti. These schools were boarding schools and were divided into primary grades, Prathama, ages 7-8, and middle grades, Madhyama, ages 13-16. The school taught mostly Sanskrit texts, Puranas, and ritual documents. Graduation from a Pathshala had little direct meaning. There was little to distinguish the Pathshala training and those who had been taught by their father. The most important ideals for the high caste student was to gain admission to the Sanskrit college in Banaras. Admission there was dependent on passing an examination to which both Pathshala and home trained schools were eligible. Those who were able to go to Banaras came back with high prestige, as all Pandits were initially from there. For high caste people, teachers were available to each religious text and ensure a basic literacy necessary for purposes of administration. In the education of upper class and or caste students bound for careers in the government as expert in foreign affairs, Mughal influence became apparent. Urdu and Persians were introduced and taught from 19th century. Education under the Ranas. During the Rana period, 1847-1950, the British system of education as practiced in India began to have some influence. Soon after Ranas came into power, the first school was founded by Dor Bahadur Rana within the confines of the Rana's palace as part of modernization program initiated after a visit to France and England. The palace school was accessible only to Rana children. From the beginning, there was an awareness of the potential of educational system as an instrument of change, so that an attempt was made to control its effect by keeping the school under close scrutiny. After Jung Bahadur's death, his successor Ranadeep Singh Rana became prime minister. He was more liberal and moved the schools from palace ground and opened it to other non-Rana children of high status. This school, called Dovar Palace High School, was one of the first of what came to be known as English school. This English school consisted of 9 grades, with enrollment beginning at age of 7 or 8. Though the school was theoretically open to all, in effect it remained open only to those in the Rana family and the upper class close to them. The curriculum was derived from English model and included courses in English, mathematics, history, and geography. While Nepali and Sanskrit were taught, little else of Nepal was introduced. The history or geography that was taught was confined to that of British Isles and India, a practice that was to instill a sense of inferiority and ineffectiveness of things Nepali and debasement of ethnic heritage of different Nepali people. For the next 40 years, no other schools were added or opened. Those educated in the Daba High School became valued by the Ranas because of their knowledge and skill that became increasingly important for dealing with outside world, both politically and economically. All graduates of the school were employed by the Ranas in some administrative capacity. Eventually, the school education became a prerequisite to employment in various important government positions and came to symbolize power and prestige. Some of the educated began to think of the future of Nepal and the place education within it. One such idealist was Devsanta Rana, who became prime minister after the death of his elder brother in 1901. He started opening up primary schools throughout the country. Almost 200 schools were opened before his younger brother Chandrasanta exiled him after 4 months in office. The very attitude of Ranas towards education was still evident, and these new schools were soon closed down under the suspicion of being instrument of treason. Subsequently, another kind of school, a Nepali language Pathshala or Bhasa Pathshala, was developed during the Rana period. Its purpose was to train students in clerical skills to become clerks in Rana administration, typically in position beneath those produced by Darbar High School. It was open to all, though mainly high-caste male children went there. These schools were funded by the state and not by the Kuti, and hence were not autonomous as Sanskrit Pathshala were. In 1947, when India attained independence from British rule, several basic schools on the principle of Mahatma Gandhi were founded. As interpreted in Nepal, these principles emphasize productive self-sufficiency. This focus on skill training and commitment to work was never really popular, and these schools failed to attain the prestige of Dover High School. This innovation has been introduced by yet another liberal Rana Prime Minister, Padma Samser, who was later forced to resign and enter self-exile. For a short time, the momentum for educational expansion was arrested, but to have independence in India was an impact on Nepal. The Rana were soon removed and the educational movement resumed. The first college in Nepal was founded in 1918 with its students recruited from Darbar High School. Courses in economics, civics, political science, English literature, history, geography, Nepali and Sanskrit literature, mathematics, physics, and chemistry were offered. The professional quality of the graduates of the college, however, was not high. Some Rana students, or those close to the Ranas, were sent out of the country to Japan, Europe, or India for professional education in such disciplines as medicine and engineering. the Ranas designated a Director General of a Public Education, but it was essentially an impressive title with little responsibility. Mostly the Director General was available to listen to complaints. Other officers of importance who were responsible for education under the Ranas include the Inspector of Schools, who checked the quality of education in the both English and Pathshala schools, and the College Principal's Office, whose sole concern was the administration of the college. Funds for the English schools were provided by Prime Minister's Office rather than by the Director General. The Public Construction Office was responsible for provision of school buildings, while buildings maintenance was the responsibility of yet another office. Both the high school and college curricula were developed at Patna in India. On the whole, there was no real educational policy, and functions and of educational administration were dispersed and uncoordinated. The educational system produced recruits for the government, typically for communication with foreign powers. Most professionals in Nepal at the time, whether doctors, engineers, or architects, were not the product of Nepali educational institution but were graduates of Indian schools. Early 50s. There were some sporadic efforts to develop and modernize the countries during the pre-1950s period. Both real concentrated programs were introduced only after 1950s. Activity in the government sectors began to expand rapidly, creating both white and blue collar jobs at a dramatic rate. People with marginal qualification could find attractive jobs, and this began to have a profound impact on the people at large. Enrollment at existing school and college began to swell beyond their capacities, causing more such institutions to come into being. But there was still no widespread sense of the general importance of education for the country as a whole, and there was only a very primitive kind of educational policy. People did not look for any benefit from education apart from the assurance of white-collar jobs, which they expected to be provided in limited numbers. As discussed in the previous chapter, when the Ranas were overthrown, the model of government adopted was imported from India. A Ministry of Education was appointed with political credentials, whose task was to build the first ministry. The development of real industry along Indian lines led to a bureaucratization of educational civil service. With with a great increase in size of administrative machinery, the increased bureaucracy allowed an expansion of opportunities for the educated, as they now had a great number of government positions to fill. Success in gaining a prestigious position within the government administration now depended on having the appropriate formal qualification as well as having the right aftermarket connections. The most highly regarded qualification was a bachelor's degree, which allowed one to qualify for any government jobs. Next and important came the high school diploma, which qualified the recipient for lower clerical jobs. None of this qualification prepared the person for the job in which he was attached, but were mainly formal degrees. For a time in 1950s, formal qualification and especially a certificate of graduation became a significant factor for acquiring a job. This affected our general educational process by promoting a certificate orientation at the cost of quality of education. The main impetus for change in the realm of education at the time came not from the ministry or from the existing school or college system, but from the initiative of the people. The motivation to improve the school system was based on the fact that education has become a necessary requisite for the certain jobs and has become a symbol of prestige in itself. During Rana period, education in English schools was the privilege of high classes. The opening of English schools was seen by some as a door to high-class status. Nepalese who had been to India and even further were impressed by the contribution of education to modernization and were ready to support changes in the educational system. It was mainly the upper class who pushed for educational expansion. With the overthrow of the Rana, there was a re-emergence of hope and pride, manifested in aspirations for important social and political position through education. The upper caste people dispersed throughout Nepal were mainly members of entrepreneurial middle class, acting as local money lenders and eventually landlords and patrons of the local clients. They used local funds and resources to build schools based on the English model, only for the purpose of educating their own children. Schools were rarely opened specifically for local ethnic people as in the early years. They were not interested in sending their children to such schools. Only after the schools commenced at the local level was there an attempt to acquire formal state recognition and perhaps state support. To some extent, the self-initiated local activity was meant to act as a lure to the government, providing the initial local educational infrastructure that might elicit a greater willingness to action on the part of the Kathmandu authorities. It was at this point, however, that the local groups encountered the ineffectiveness of the formal bureaucratic machinery and were forced to make new approaches to the central educational authorities at Chakrivals. As consequences was the further strengthening of Chakra system in the new regime. Today, most of the educated comes from the upper caste and upper class groups dispersed throughout the country. Most local ethnic groups still feels the need for higher education, although an increasing number of their children are attending the primary schools. They have been opened throughout the country. Later 50s and 60s. Things began to change further in the field of education when the United States extended both technical and financial resources to the government of Nepal from 1954. Many people inside and outside Kathmandu were suspicious of American motive, and this suspicion was exacerbated by Marxist-oriented political groups. Initially, many schools built with local initiative wanted to no connection with American program, but in course of time, American influence came to be the most significant in educational development. The American advisors were instrumental, along with the Ministry of Education, in organizing National Education Planning Commission in March 1954 to survey the state of education and present a general report on educational need of the country. They founded the first college of education, including the demonstration school for the training of teacher and the normal schools which were mobile training schools for primary school teacher. American efforts were also directed to help develop multipurpose high schools in various parts of the country with an emphasis on technical training. New colleges founded at this time were the result mainly of Nepali efforts with little American participation. American assistance helped train many Nepalese at American universities and helped organize the first university in Nepal. Tribhuvan University was founded in 1956. During the late 50s and 60s, the school system was expanded and opened to a greater range of people. The initiative remained community-based and school tended to remain very small. To be approved, local school had to follow the government-approved curriculum. Pathshala school continued to provide free education to bounds of priestly background. During this period, the bureaucracy of Ministry of Education grew considerably. It was highly centralized, though organized on a regional basis. Small regional offices existed to distribute the meager amount of money provided by the state, inspect level of performance, and grant permission to open new schools. The ministry was conceived to help to have a large planning responsibilities from the beginning, but there was little real planning, and ministry functions followed on recruitment, general and fixed fiscal administration. Many people realized that educational system was meaningless and not geared to the special need of the country. Education was quickly becoming a symbol of status, as high school and college diplomas and degrees were being used simply for the purpose of acquiring higher status. The bureaucratic organization of the ministry quickly ossified. Planning was reduced to the act of punditry, and chakri became once more established way of getting things done. Though a school and college graduation was necessary for job advancement, it still required the development of the correct aftermarket to secure one's position, and in the final analysis, aftermarket was the critical element and not job skill or qualifications. Exposure to Western culture and technology acted to eliminate the disparity between Nepal and the technically advanced nation, which tended to feed Nepali sense of inferiority. For many, this sense of inferiority merely fed to the belief in fatalism. The task of transforming Nepali society into one technically and economically at par with the rising Asian standard became daunting, and a common response was passive resignation. The belief in fatalism encouraged its purpose, but some of those who did not ascribe to this fatalistic belief system responded differently. Within these marginal groups were developed a stronger sense of the need for developed manpower base and the critical role of education within. This concern then led to demand for the stronger technical education, demands that ran counter to the prevailing tendencies and which therefore were implicitly seen as antagonistic to those supporting the ascribed model of Nepalese society. The result was National Education System Plan. National Education System Plan. The initiative for educational change came from the center of power structure. King Mahinda himself made it easier for those interested in developing manpower resources through education to overcome opposition from conservative section of the society. The government was able to prepare and execute a national education system plan by 1969. The educated elite accepted this change rather reluctantly and felt that it was unfairly imposed on them by a powerful minority. From the beginning, the change towards the technical orientation in education was challenged as undemocratic, and ironically, a Western concept of democracy was used to defend a value system that is at the heart of rigidly hierarchical caste system. Before the introduction of NESP, educational expansion was never based on a perceived need of the common people, but was designed only for those of the highest level of society. When it was extended downwards, it never shared its elitist bias. By the time NESP was implemented, there was relatively a larger number of educated Nepalese participating in policy formulation as compared to 1954. When NEPC was formed, all schools were nationalized and with the exception of Sanskrit Pathshala. All schools were fully supported by the government, and to support this new activity, there was a large increase in educational budget, with the Ministry of Education becoming one of the largest within the government. Actual changes were tested in a process of experimentation carried out district-wise, and educational reforms were phased in gradually. However, new schools were still established as a response to local initiative, and Chakari and Afnamanche were operative in getting these things done at the local level. The implementation of any NESP itself proved as yet another example of successful operation of chakri and aftermanche. The only sincere people involved in this exercise were the king and the crown prince, a young idealist who had just completed his education in the Western University. The fact that NESP was pushed rather prematurely became more than obvious in subsequent years. Its strong supporters themselves displayed their unhappiness with it by either sending their own children to schools not operating under NESP and by challenging its effectiveness when their own children did not succeed in getting admission into the institution they wanted, especially those which provided degrees in social science with little effort. This double standard and the practice of chakra to seek favors from the then crown prince, who was mainly responsible for the introduction of NESP, became increasingly clear. NESP thus began to lose its efficacy and strength as soon as its former supporter turned out to be its saboteur. Meanwhile, all those changes were made within the colleges and the university, including the introduction of entrance examination and a semester system. The system of examination was overhauled so that for the first time students had to work hard at their studies and demonstrate their academic competence on a regular basis. This was different from the previous system of annual examination. In order to gain a postgraduate degree, candidates were required to spend a year in rural areas, either working with local panchayat or organization involved in development activities or teaching in a school. Though there was some initial resistance, eventually the students began to appreciate this. The program proved to be so successful that it attracted the attention of other third world countries. As mentioned, the Ministry of Education was greatly expanded. As part of the expansion of a National Education Committee was established under the chairmanship of Education Minister, which concentrated on the administration of education under his direct leadership. Previously, he had a more ineffectual role. This new position allowed the full realization of the paternal form of organization within the minister, which there was an expansion of the middle level bureaucracy and a greater dispersion of administrative apparatus across the country. The promotion of minister into was what became a paternal role merely encouraged the tendency to bypass the bureaucracy and to concentrate chakri at the head of the organization. The NEC, in its formal plans, set targets for the number of graduates in various specialized areas. Essentially, these targets proved to be unrealistic and pressurized both students and teachers, who soon reacted. Others voiced fear of sabotage of local panchayat by students in NDS program. The requirement of examination threatened the system of privileges by emphasizing on competence. Some of those in higher position became concerned with their own children might not be able to achieve the same status if they were to fail entrance examination. Previously, their positions were guaranteed by social status and aftermarket connections, but with the imposition of entrance examination, this was no longer the case. As the failures from the higher status increased, so too did the demand for the abolition of examination. Students sabotaged the examination system through widespread and large-scale cheating, which was frequently ignored by supervisors and teachers. Cumulatively, there was enough opposition to ensure the demise of NESP system. The entrance examination was the first reform to be discarded, and slowly most effective part of the education system was dismantled. The NESP collapsed by 1979, what replaced the NESP was not a product of policy or of any commission, but merely a default system which was largely a reversion to the earlier form. The legacy of an NESP is the large educational budget, the increased power of education minister, and the large job providing bureaucracy, many part of which no longer have any purpose, as the program for which they were created has been abolished. The NDS the NDS system does continue in a reduced form, but it has been made almost irrelevant. There is much cheating to fulfill requirements and little serious labor. Polytechnic schools providing technical skills have been developed as optional schools open to anyone finishing the 8th grade. Skills training itself is becoming increasingly popular, and in particular, women's technical schools providing training in nursing and home science are well attended. Nepal has made impressive progress by any standards during the past 4 decades. The literacy rate was 2% in 1951 and has now reached over 40%. 85% of all children of school-going age are at school. The target of 60% literacy has been planned with the primary education for all by the end of the century. Women's literacy has been rather slow, with only 12% of the total in 1986. In 1986, nearly 80% of all children aged 6 to 10 were in primary schools. 31%, at least 11 to 12, were in the lower secondary schools, and 23% aged 13 to 15 were in secondary schools. This amounted to more than 27 lakh students in 18,688 schools from primary to higher secondary levels. There were 77,844 teachers. There were currently more than 150 campuses, including private ones, a university faculty of more than 4,000, and an equal number of administrative staff. Admissions of students at college level had reached more than 80,000 in the year 1988-89. More than 18,000 students have been admitted in Science College and in Technical Institute during the same period. The figures are impressive, but they belie the abuse and misapplication of educational qualification. The minimal real impact that education has had in extending the manpower resources of the country, the extensive laxity in discipline combined with cheating that is undermining academic standards, and the administrative chaos that is currently rampant within the university system that does exist, has been due in large part to community-based initiative. The reason that a considerable number of children do not attend school is that they form a major portion of economic workforce. In a majority of cases where agriculture is the main subsistence, children have to play an active role in augmenting the workforce of the family. Sometimes this goes beyond family level, and their working hours have to be pooled for the general need of the entire community or village. Children are in such situation collect all the cattle of village, take them to a common grazing area, and look after them while adult members of the village are busy with agricultural work during the peak seasons. There is also the practice of requisitioning female children's labor for schoolrooms, so that boys remain in school longer than girls throughout rural Nepal. Even in suburban areas of Kathmandu and among the poorer section in urban areas, girls drop out of school much earlier than boys, though both sexes are sent to school at the same age. Children are part of a continuous extension of the economic and social life of society, and circumstances still greatly restrict their opportunities for education. Because traditionally, education was designed solely for the high caste and highly placed people, the newly educated people tend to equate themselves with these classes. That is why we have so many educated people who do not want to work. Education has made them socially equal with prosperous people. The educated consider themselves purer and of higher status than those who are uneducated and who perform physical work. The educated are just as loath as to work physically and productively as are traditionally high caste people. With the increasing popularity of modern education, there is also proportionate dislike for work and an increasing dependency on external help, influential connection, the institutionalization of chakri, and the practice of nepotism and favoritism for self-promotion. In fact, passing the grades in school in large part of the country is considered more important than acquiring skill or knowledge. Technical education lags far behind what is necessary for this country to meet its developmental goal. Various skills practiced at the working people's level continue to come from family-based informal learning by doing. This has never been recognized as a system of training by the government, even though this is the most widely practiced method and has provided the large number of skilled and semi-skilled workers required by the country. The economy and the system in general has been sustained mainly by this group of productive people. The majority of Nepalese do not have many job choices since the occupation is determined by birth. For caste people, this means an scripted determination of occupation, and for non-caste people, a determination by other cultural and economic circumstances. In either case, people are not accustomed to thinking of a choice of profession but learn from generation to generation the same professions from elder within the family. Nepalese in general do not believe that they have to be trained in anything beyond what they see and learn while assisting senior members of their own family. In cases where this is reasonably profitable, there is no stigma attached and they are happy with their work, guarding their family and caste-based professional skills jealousy. Technical professions have no tradition of training at formal institutions within Nepal, but are taught typically within the family. All craftsmen today who perform professional work such as masons, carpenter, bricklayer, bronze and other metals workers, mechanics, drillers, weaver, and even agricultural workers have never been formally trained. Not only cobblers, tailors, iron and goldsmiths, potters and so forth are born into the professional caste, but even physicians and surgeons learn their skills while assisting their family members and do not consider formal training an essential part of the preparation for a job. Alternate professions are not available outside of those prescribed by the circumstances of birth. The idea of occupational mobility is novel in Nepal and not strongly internalized. The educational system has only recently been available to provide the opportunities for such occupational mobility. This new mobility has been largely in one direction, towards politics and administrative jobs, which are considered to be the only respectable profession. These two fields are the only ones outside priesthood which could be undertaken without the risk of losing hierarchy caste position. Consequently, this occupation have required a lot of prestige and are associated particularly with high caste of people's imagination. These professions are also the only ones where non-high caste people can work at the same level as the trade-wearing high caste, so that there they are seen as a means of acquiring status. Becoming a politician or an administrator is, through association, synonymous with status mobility. Technical trades have no real status and hence do not appeal to Nepali youth today when choosing their occupation. The qualification gained in pursuing a technical degree, however, are valid qualification for political and administrative position, and it is only because of this that students become interested in technical education. The purpose of going to technical school is not to acquire the qualification needed for entering the administration, not to acquire the skills needed to pursue some technical professional activity. Many people are not working in technical profession for which they are formally trained, including those educated at universities abroad. Instead, they go in for political and administrative jobs. In the mind of such people, there never was any interest or commitment to the jobs for which they were trained. Technical schools have a long way to go before they can begin to make a visible impact on the national workforce in the manner intended. Membership in traditional professions was responsible for the social designation of Vaishya Shudra, and untouchable status. The social objectives of Nepali youth is to escape this denigrated category and become on neo bounds. To do this, they must actively avoid becoming professional technicians. Though there is a pressing need for skilled technicians and technical institutes and schools to train them, the low regard for technical activity and the continuing strength of bound values compelled the government to establish a Sanskrit university recently at the expense of further improvement of other educational establishment. The irony of this situation is that workers from lower social and economic labels gain status by gaining the role of technically trained high officials, while the properly trained and qualified technical people lose status by working. Effectively, it is the unskilled low-caste worker who has to do the job of the engineer as well as fill the majority of health posts outside Kathmandu and to administer first aid and the distribution of medicine. As most of the time trained health personnel are not available, an anthropological field researcher gives a vivid picture of the situation when she writes that after walking several hours to reach a health post, I frequently arrive just as patients do to find the health workers away, sometimes for a day, more often for several days, supervising village health workers VHWS in the field or on official business in the district or centers or on personal leave. The peon, a formerly untrained person employed in every office to do janitorial work and other menial jobs, remained at the post alone, informally interviewing and diagnosing patients, though he was not supposed to distribute medicine in the health assistant's absence. In each of the 24 health posts and 10 hospitals I visited, I found peons actively involved in healthcare, and in 9 cases the peon was the only health workers available. The health inspector in western Nepal reported in September 1978 that 3 of the 8 posts had trained health workers and other 5 were staffed only by peons. There are few chances that jobs will actually be performed by a person formally qualified to do it. This is clearly illustrated by the attempt at introducing modern technology in agriculture. Agriculture training institutions are built, yet farmers are not the ones who go there for training. People who have no interest in the soil are the ones who get the degree in agricultural sciences. Graduation is regarded as the final hurdle in establishing right over a salaried position within the government. A university degree is considered a license to read at the top of the social hierarchy, and these people would not wish to lower themselves to a level of Sudra by soiling their hand. The actual agricultural work is done by people who never get any training. The national need for manpower skills has increasingly dominated the thinking of educational planner at a higher level, and various training schools were established to produce these skills. Initially, few were interested in attending such schools and institutes, so that a stipend had to be introduced to attract students. It was the stipend that was attractive, not the training program itself. As a result, wrong people had been trained with the best of intention. Notes and references. Peons are usually from the clean caste who have gained their position through aftermarché. In the health field, such peons do learn medical skills informally from their association with the trained staff and other experienced peons. Points of similarity. The difference is that my argument indicates fatalistic values as the root cause of the problem, while Lohani is pointing the powerful external others as the root source. This external projection, however, is merely consistent with the fatalistic worldview, in which he seems to be unwittingly caught. Lohani also argues that the rural development requires political management, not the foreign technical inputs. Technological inputs such as the rural transport system makes inroads for colonialism and comparable bourgeois system. This kind of criticism in particular seems to be connected with modern forms of seminar punditry, where secular erudition has been substituted for Vedic ritualistic erudition. These observations are not grounded in the realities of Nepali society. The vicissitudes of Nepali culture is what has been consistently ignored by foreign developmentalists and native critics. It is not that difficult to see the affluence and power achieved by the Western European Christian society was not a geographical accident, nor was the colonization of the Asian subcontinent primarily made possible by the greater firepower of the colonizer. It is a difference in the value system and the lifestyle of the people that made it possible. Japanese economic and industrial power is a result of their value system that emphasizes on rational thinking, stimulates the desire for achievement, and which rewards hard work. The social observer from South Korea, a country which made a rapid and dramatic progress in modernization during the past few decades, summed up the problem when he said, problematics are social conditions in which one cannot work even if he wants to, and a social structure under which, however hard he may work, he cannot succeed. The ideal society would allow men to work hard and guarantee success to hardworking men. A developing and healthy society should motivate men to engage in diligent labor and reward hard work accordingly. Our system, our current value system at least, which dominates those critical sectors of society acting as mediator of foreign influence, has been subverted by the fatalistic element of the caste system, and this fatalism has been far-reaching consequences in all areas of society. The consequence of fatalism is debilitating to social advancement and facilitates the abuse of the current transitional developmental process. Nepal cannot look to the cornucopia of foreign aid for the solution of all its problems, and it is no use blaming it for the negative fallout of fatalistic belief. Nepal is not alone in remaining backward and poor. There are many societies in the third world which are poor and backward. The reasons behind their backwardness are many and different, though the symptoms are the same. Mostly, however, such society discourages innovation. They tend to maintain themselves by fairly rigid prescription of fixed adult role into which both men and women are fitted. This expected social roles defines the limit of aspiration for each generation. People who have made a comparative studies of different societies know that when status are ascribed rather than achieved, individual effort towards excellence are not directed through any form of innovation. Rather, the enhancement of status occurs only through the realization of previously well-defined role, position, It is only the social change that will come from the continual dynamic disequilibrium occurs in a society that we begin to observe the development of achievement motivation in its modern form. Nepal will need foreign aid for quite some time to come, at least until it is able to develop an industrial base. Foreign aid has become an integral part of the national economic and international political life. It would be short sighted to wish it away. There is no wisdom in blaming foreign aid or and wishing for its discontinuation. This does not, however, mean that Nepal should wait for foreign aid to take care of all its needs while Nepal sits back doing nothing themselves. The people have to work hard to help develop a higher standard of living. The world has shrunk because of technological advancement in recent decades. Nepal cannot remain in isolation, but will, of necessity, be forced to become part of the world's community. This cannot be otherwise, even if Nepal makes a conscious decision to remain poor and underdeveloped. Another observation from Ri is of relevance to us here. The history of mankind is sometimes compared to the Great Symphony. All the nations, large and small, which have their own cultures, are taking part in the symphony, each with its own unique sound. When some instruments make a false sound, the harmony will be weakened and finally destroyed. When the sound of such strong instrument observe that of others, the symphony exhibits dissonance as the sound becomes cacophonous. To perform the symphony, all nations must participate in open interchange of culture, each playing its own instrument. Foreign aid can facilitate Nepal becoming a fully functioning and a productive member of the society, but it needs to be used realistically and beneficially, and this can only be done when it is spent on training the common people who will use this skill rather than educating aspiring individuals with hierarchic attitude to become pedagogies to preach pessimism and influence a very poor self-image of they image as they themselves have had in long run. The Nepali population remained untouched by has been remained untouched by Hindu caste principle is Nepal's greatest treasure. This is a very sizable portion of the population, but presently they live in remote areas at the very above subsistence level, with little or no education and no opportunities to develop and actualize their aspirations. Their values are not the values of hierarchical Bahunism. They do not they do know the importance of hard work and endurance and the role of individual effort in the improvement of one's circumstances, and they have positive qualities of strong cooperative behavior and an appreciation of the general well-being and importance of the group and community as a whole. Being an importance of the group or community as a whole, the Japu in Kathmandu Valley and the others who are even less affected by the Hindu caste hierarchy, such as the Sherpa, Tamang, Mughals, and the Limpus, are untapped resources of the nation. Only when the foreign aid can reach these people in sufficient quantity and of the right kind will Nepal genuinely be able to establish the basis of her future prosperity. Notes and reference. The planned target by the turn of the century is to host more than 1 million tourists a year. He used money from the Pashupatinath Trust for the reconstruction of Kathmandu instead. Progress report of the first 5-year plan, Nepal National Planning Council. Conclusion. In Nepal, government statistics are available on critical aspects of the economy, but little exists by way of social statistics. There are estimation of total population and some attempt is made to index changes in the birth rate. Significantly, figures for the population of the various ethnic groups do not exist. We do not know what the relative incidence of Khas and Kirat groups are within the population. We are not we do not know how many Gurung, Magas, Limbus, Jhirels, or Tharus there really are. This ignorance is used to support a major distortion of characterization of Nepali people. Without any real information to the contrary, the tendency within the administration is to perceive Nepal is a country with predominantly homogeneous religious and cultural pattern. This is misrepresentation. The high caste Hindus have been portrayed as the majority of population, with the Matwalis being considered a minority. It is considered only natural that the culture of majority group becomes a legitimate national culture, and that the the hierarchization of the ethnic people is continuous with the development of consolidated national identity. In part, such a misconstruction results from a tendency to perceive the caste system as an inevitable condition for a legitimate Hindu kingdom and as being coextensive with the use of Nepali as a first language. But Nepali, originally the language of the caste in the West, was adopted by many Tibeto-Burmese speaking people in the Khas Empire and became increasingly important within the Kathmandu Valley before unification. Unification, to a large extent, merely formalized what was already happening, but did extend the Nepali language further into the east. Many Kirat people hence speak Nepali. Further, many Gurungs, Magar, Tharus, and Khas are Matwalis and are not treated as high caste. Caste people are Matwali except those who are Kshatriyas themselves by wearing a ritual thread. The bound Kshatri then are in a minority. Though in minority, they are a powerful one. A vast majority of teachers, university professors, academicians, intellectuals, and journalists are high caste Hindus, namely the bound Kshatri and the Swastra among Nevas, who are equally hierarchic in their overall attitude towards the rest of the Nepali people. Consequently, the derivation and transmission of information about Nepal and about the outside world takes place through the hands of these people who are highly hierarchic in their attitude. A result of this hierarchism is a tendency to disparage things Nepali, depreciating national accomplishments while exalting those of India and the plains, the birthplace of caste Hinduism. The true base of Nepali social orders are sought to be located by them within India, Brahmanic historical tradition. A fatalistic orientation also contributes to a sense of passivity and defeatism towards the prospect of revitalization of Nepali society. Key elements of the Indian influence then are the depreciation of things Nepali, Indianization of religious culture, poor self-image, and fatalistic resignation. Through their control of information dissemination and education, these sentiments become broadly dispersed. High caste Hindus and others who have been influenced by it are strongly represented in governmental administration. The civil service plays a considerable role in the political life of the country, and over the past 30 years has been effective body of government. Outside the priesthood, which is an exclusive privilege of the Bowens, an occupation within the administrative bureaucracy is a traditional avenue of employment for high caste, that is, Bound Chetri and Frester, who, with the right aftermarket connection, could expect a speedy placement regardless of actual need within the bureaucracy. Many of these high caste people regard such a placement as their natural rights. The Nepali civil service then has a tendency to expand not in response to an increase in organizational function or productive need, but in response to an increase in its popularity among upper caste people as a source of employment. The organizational form of bureaucracy reflects the vicissitudes of chakri. Bureaucratic practices have been strongly influenced by caste upper attitudes, and decisions made within the bureaucracy are strongly guided, if not determined, by fatalistic sentiment. Because foreign aid operates through the civil service, fatalistic people have acted as key intermediaries between the provision of these external resources and their eventual allocation. More generally, they have acted to mediate most relation between Nepal and the outside world. This has directly influenced development in Nepal in all dimensions. The upper castes are strongly represented in politics. They have been most successful in political areas with a different political agenda and style of campaign. Many of them are isolated from the people with an abrupt and elusive interpersonal style and tends to base their campaign on abstract issues. Only a few among them are approachable, interact with people, and address concrete issues that our electorate can appreciate. But many remain persistent outsiders, and their isolation and alienation sometimes result in cultivation of revolutionary sympathies. Rather than being a part of the established though developing political apparatus, such individual fills the ranks of revolutionaries and idealistic democrats, both and whom espouse abstract utopian philosophies having little contact with the genuine needs of the people and their culture. Such people then become key element of political opposition. The extremely hierarchized individual appears to be having the hardest time adjusting to change. Many seems to be caught with the expectation of being automatically provided for. They are perhaps the most dependent of all Nepalese, but the society that supported them in the past does not do so today, and many have not adapted to it. It is among the highest caste that one finds the strongest indication of anomaly consequent on the process of acculturation. Ironically, though the caste-related designation of matwalis, meaning alcohol drinking, is applied to lower caste and ethnic groups, it is among the trade-winning high caste that serious alcoholism currently appears to be growing. While not all high caste Hindus are orthodox, even the irreligious ones can remain the victims of their hierarchic upbringing and be greatly affected by fatalistic beliefs. Some, as a result of their personal experience and reflections, develop a strong opposition towards fatalism itself, but replace it with something that an abstract label has remarkable similarities to many of the features of caste hierarchy, and they continue to behave as pundits. They may be atheistics, international travelers with an education abroad, having professional degrees, but their orientation to develop and their way of action remains influenced by caste principles. They are passive defeatists who see an improvised Nepal and lose any hope for a future. Many are embarrassed by things Nepali which they think are inferior, and they look to the outside world as a source of sophistication and cultivation. They intellectualize problems and subject them to endless debate while passing on any real responsibility for decision making to some higher level. Their new superficial membership to the world culture becomes an opportunity for self distinction from the uneducated and unsophisticated common mass. They make use of chakri and when in privileged position with their perception that the country cannot be greatly helped, we use the opportunity to help themselves and their afno manche. Not all educated people are from high caste background, but even an aspiring non-caste ethnic individual who has succeeded through personal effort to gain an education and the respected positions, when acculturated with the caste people develops hierarchy caste attitude. This is the great current danger of the Hindu caste, high caste dominated value system, that is that it is readily secularized and can be recreated anew by those not traditionally of the caste background. But Nepal is passing through a stage of transition and traditional social structures are being modified to accommodate change. With, with ever newer social organization being introduced, for some this is a time of opportunity. Though the opportunity should be for all, in the time of flux it has become apparent that the adverse features of Bahadurism can be promulgated and perpetuated by members of any social class and ethnic groups. With the history of caste, there is a danger of development of new secularized caste system, where a socially mobile consolidate their position by blocking others out, their competitors or those closely behind them. The high caste people are in minority and their value system are not prevalent value system among the majority of Nepali people in Nepal. Yet fatalism and hierarchy, the hallmark of the caste principle, must be taken very seriously and must be recognized as the most influential value system. Any strategy for development, if it is to be genuine and not a redistribution of foreign monies into the local hands, must oppose fatalism and a hierarchic social order, because the two are irreconcilable. This needs to be traumatic for Nepal, because the form of fatalism associated with the caste hierarchy is not Nepali, even though it is sometimes believed to be so by some people. Nepal has other value systems to draw upon that have much greater potential. These are the value system of traditional ethnic groups of the country who are not divided into vertical hierarchic order and are, as a rule, hardworking with a conscientious discipline. They also share a sense of guilt among their own context, which the fatalistic people have lost altogether with the introduction of ritual of giving charity to the priest to absolve a sense of guilt. Like many other ethnic people, the Japu peasants and other professional groups among Nevas still have much to offer. They are the craftsmen and other skilled workers who are the descendant and those responsible for the great days of Kathmandu's past. The creativity of these people has been intermittently suppressed, but under the right circumstances has readily blossomed. For 1,000 of years, in the time of the Lichavis, they supported the kingdom, and during the breakup of medieval period, when circumstances favored, they again displayed their excellence. If they feel socially oppressed and disparate, and if their work is taken with little in exchange, it is not likely that any creativity and industry will be forthcoming. But with encouragement and opportunity, their values and ideals represent a great and presently unappreciated resource. They have a commitment to work. What they need is stimulation for their motivation, and this can happen when the general lethargy of society consequent to fatalism has been discarded. Outside the Kathmandu Valley, there is a various ethnic people of Nepal who remain uncounted and unconsidered. Their culture is regarded as primitive and of no importance. This is a grave error. As mentioned in the first chapter, the various ethnic people are of two main stocks group, the Indo-Aryan Khas and Tibeto-Burmese Kirat. With some suggestion of Dravidian admixture in the south. Culturally, there is also a range with a few hunters and gatherers and pastoralists, the bulk being agriculturists. Others, mainly the highland dwellers, such as the Serpa, Manang, Thakali, are strongly mercantile. Though these various ethnic groups differ from one another in many details, for the most part they share significant values and social institutions in common. The peasants inhabit a large village society. The village is a relatively discrete unit with a known geographic boundary. There is an intimacy between the people of the village and the land they live on and cultivate. The intimacy is based on the people's dependency on the land for nurturance, which requires that they be particularly sensitive to its perturbation and the method by which it might be revitalized. To ensure their continued nurturance in this manner, the people have over a long period of time developed particular practical technologies, the application of which helps to ensure the productivity of land. Supplementing these agricultural technologies is the development of system of magical and spiritual control of the local force of nature through worship, appeasement in sacrifice, and various kinds of casualry. Meanwhile, there has developed a sense of debt and awe to the ancestors who were responsible for the development of this harmonious society. The widespread practice in Nepal is for people to believe that the ancestors and each clan coalesce into a single spiritual entity, which is the clan deity. Clan deities are often merged with the deities of nature. Consequently, there is a complete unity of relation between things both human and natural. This could help not only to increase productivity but also to improve environmental and nature conservation. The village is inhabited by familiar people with known abilities and predisposition. As there is dependence of people as a whole on the land, so there is an interdependence among the people to cooperate in the management of the land, forests, water, and in harvesting its product. The village is an efficiently productive and harmonious social group. Within it, the individual develops a sense of self which is embedded in a particular social network that has continuity. In many cases, that continuity is grounded in the connection to common clan deity, with which all social actors within the clan, will eventually merge. The sense of self is not a separate one, individually empowered to take personal responsibility and control over the individual actions. The self is connected to the group in a way that appears to be common to and has been studied more thoroughly, if not definitely, in East Asia, and it is not same with the earlier mentioned phenomena of Afnamanche. In East Asian societies, some have talked of the collectivist self as opposed to an individualistic found in Eastern societies. This particular construction of self, common in Nepal, is very capable of productive and creative effort, and its potential for success is demonstrated in the success of the Japanese, Korean, and Chinese in Taiwan and Singapore. In Japan, in particular, the economic business application of the social organization built upon such group self-definition are clearly a main ingredient of success, attributed by some Japanese management to some not attentive to it. It is an elusive quality that they have tried to theoretically isolate and replicate an inappropriate cultural environment such as the in American attempts at importing Japanese management practice. This potential for a strong commitment of self to the group and the benefit of cooperative action can be very vital factors in the successful development of Nepal's inner potential. Of course, the Japanese tendency to collectivism is not identical with that of Nepal's, and may be stronger reinforced by the series of other factors that are not shared in Nepal. There is the important question of motivation. Japanese men, in particular, have been characterized by being impelled by a strong self-affiliate obligation, especially towards the mother. and this sense of obligation has been internalized as a strong but productive sense of guilt. High caste Hindu Nepali do not have this kind of sense of guilt, so that the motivation will have to come from elsewhere. This could be developed with further research and cause the motivation among the working people at different level. All the qualities discovered in Japanese are contributing to their success are their capabilities of hard work and for endurance, including the developed expectation that nothing comes easily and that goals may not even be realized for several generations. Both of these qualities are very evident among ethnic people of Nepal. While aesthetically beautiful, the geography of Nepal, for most part, is not easy to live with. Its harshness plays a big role in the development of endurance among the Nepalese. In most areas, only the hardest of work ensures the survival of the self, family, and community. There has developed among Nepali people that many of these qualities found critical to Japanese success. The Thakali people of the Gandaki region has been working as an entire group for several generations to transfer their wealth and status. The name Thakali, according to them, is a recent adoption. It is a corruption of Thakuri, an index of their intentions as well as pretensions. The irony of the situation is that they want to change their caste and not remain Matwali. Within the Nepali caste system, this is a possibility. The economic base of their hope is mercantile. They had established themselves in a critical position on what had the potential to be a major trade route out of Tibetan plateau, and then developed the means to best exploit that position. But with the increasing interest in raising their status to the level of the Thakuri, many among them has been attracted towards the fatalistic hierarchy, just like feudalistic curse of the Karnali basins and the bourgeois among Newars of Kathmandu Valley has been few centuries earlier. Mercantile activity has been successfully practiced by ethnic people of Nepal since the earliest days. Proto-historical records first mention of the people of Nepal in connection with the trade goods originating in the high Tibetan plateau. It was only afterwards that people of Nepal became famous for their own industry, but under fatalistic caste principle imported from India. Mercantile activity was disparate as a polluting activity. Not only it is a form of labor, but it is crassly materialistic. Merchants are thus considered low caste. Much of what happened in China under Confucianism, the people's natural inclination towards and dexterity in mercantile trades was greatly dampened. Where the Chinese people have moved away from the stricture of traditional Confucianist society, such as in the overseas communities, this natural flair for mercantile activity has been rekindled with spectacular results. Such could be the case with Nepali people as well. Once freed from the negative aspect of ascriptive caste values and fatalism, among the ethnic peoples, then there are located some very significant human and cultural resources. These people are hardworking, persevering, and long-suffering, cooperate well and work with a dedication towards collective well-being, and have qualities needed to be successful merchants. But rather than being tapped, these resources are being shunted aside, ignored, and worse, destroyed to be replaced by the qualities of banditry, abhorrence of work, hierarchism, and the willingness to exploit others, passive dependence, and fatalism. For example, the widely publicized mass Vradabandha ceremony has negative effect of hierarchization and destruction of egalitarian base of Nepali society at large. One of the main arguments put forward for the elimination of such of the various ethnic cultures is the need to develop a strong national identity. Some pundits are arguing that this can only be possible with cultural homogeneity. with a complete institution of caste values. But pluralism is not necessarily a problem for the development of some larger encompassing social entity, such as a nation. Ethnic pluralism, to some degree, is a reality in nearly all societies. It is not pluralism per se that acts against the formation of nationhood, though the nature of relation between the various groups may act to do so. In this case, the upper caste upper caste and class people must realize that they are merely one of the elements within this pluralism. They too are ethnic minority. They should not insist on the imposition of the values of one minority over the other as a solution, especially there where the values are manifested in the social hierarchy with themselves at the top of the other beneath them. The other have resisted the solution for 2000 years. This is only way they could maintain their dignity and self-respect. Nepali people's self-respect and dignity cannot be maintained when the small number of upper class caste people consistently treat the majority as a lower and hierarchical order. The only product of this was resentment, a retreat away from national and ethnic identity, and a sense of resentment and even hostility to the state. This is in fact is a very well known phenomena the world over. Minority people struggle for an identity and demand that identity be publicly acknowledged as having import. They also demand progress, a rising standard of living, effective political order wherein they have their own role recognized properly, the greater social justice. The solution of the hierarchic upper caste people of national identities effectively to impede it. Imposition of a fatalistic hierarchic caste tradition is not a solution to the desire for nationalism. Sadly, the far-sighted advice of the great king Prithvinand Shah to treat Nepal as a garden of 4 castes and 36 ethnic communities was ignored. For his coronation, he would have been happy to have been anointed by the priests of all ethnic groups such as Limbu, Rai, Tamang, Gurung, Tharu, Dhimal, instead of subjugating them under the narrow hierarchic caste structure. To be acceptable to all, the nation must rise above the interests of only one specific group. It must encompass all their aspiration and be vehicle and support for their transformation into successfully adopted modern societies. Their neglect will support future problems because the process of transformation is not an easy one, nor does it have a natural predestined course. There are many dangers of negative side effect of acculturation, and later these are recognized as a problem. The greater they will be, and the more difficult it will be to provide satisfying solutions. Social mistakes can become institutionalized, and Nepalese of future generations will have to live with them as a part of their inheritance. The earlier issues of ethnicity are recognized, the better it will be, provided they are dealt with studiously and objectively. The king is a positive force for the country and an active catalyst for the process of nationhood because all Nepalese share a tendency for paternal dependency, which in social organization facilitates a kind of perspective that monarchy provides an ultimate beneficent paternal figure. This is both reassuring to Nepali and also becomes the basis of his developing sense of national identity. The nation includes all those that enjoy the munificence of this common father. It is an extension of family, of village, of clan, of ethnic groups that brings a new completion into incorporating all surrounding ethnic groups into a common fold. This is inherently good because it acts to harmonize relations between groups, but recognizing in any single cultural groups as important and ignorant others can be unwise, as it helps instill a sense of insecurity among those who are treated with less importance. The campaign of trade wearing Bradhabandha ceremony, which is being popularized by some high caste people, have had its own justification to have royal patronage during the medieval period, but today it is a style of trade treating everyone as equal that we have a chance of in helping the process of national integration. In an effective political system cannot afford to allow itself to be dominated by privileged group, nor can its leader afford to allow themselves to be manipulated by unprincipled chakri practitioners. Competence and integrity, even when not accompanied by finesse and style, deserve strong support at this stage in our history when economic development and national integration are by far the most important priorities. As Nepal changes, as a different ethnic society changes, most of the indigenous culture will be modified or abandoned. Vacuum will be created along with anxieties. The thrust of traditional culture has been towards the development and maintenance of cohesion and harmony. And one of the basic tools to ensure that this is any society is stability and certainty. Nepal must now learn to live with change and uncertainty. Social health can only be ensured by flexibility. The greater simplicity of most of the ethnic culture allows the greater flexibility that does the cumbersome and ossified structure of urban upper caste class society in the Kathmandu Valley. Nepal's future hope lies with them, but they are fragile resource as well and need the support and direction and some dependable source. Nepali youth have to be encouraged to ask questions about the future direction of the society. Confidence in themselves and pride in the nation, currently crippled by the fatalism, will have to be carefully cultivated. It is difficult but not impossible, as are quite few examples in the history of the world around us. It may quite be painful but has become an absolute necessity. A paragraph by Hermann Hesse quoted by William Ophuls from Staples might be an appropriately repeated here. Every age, every culture, every custom and tradition has its own character, its own weakness and its own strength, its beauty and ugliness. Accept certain suffering as matter of course. Put up patiently with certain evil. Human life is reduced to real suffering, to hell, only when two ages, to culture and religions overlap. Now there are times when a whole generation is caught in this way of two ages, two modes of life, with the consequences that it loses all the power to understand itself and has no standard, no security, no simple acquiescence. The only way of suffering of the transition is to construct a new age as rapidly as possible, so that we are no longer caught between two ages. I really wonder whether any thoughtful, honest, future-oriented, sensible person will believe for a moment that the new age is the age of fatalistic hierarchism, even though it is nurtured carefully and passionately for the couple of centuries, eloquently and rhetorically justified by some learned but fatalistic pundits and legally endorsed by authoritarian regime during the middle of the 19th century for its own selfish interests. We are working today for the well-being of the future generation and not for the revival of archaic values of the hierarchic caste discipline evolved by the ancient Hindu society of India. Nor are we working to help the future generation carry the self-image of the poorest and the most backward people in the hierarchy of the world economic order. Note and references. Even after large number of formal Tibeto-Burmese speaking ethnic people began to speak Nepali as their mother tongue, the total percentage of Nepali speakers was 51%, remaining 49% was recorded of to speaking various mother tongue other than Nepali in the census reported in 1961. Of all the people who have been member of National Panchayat since 1963 through 1988, 380 out of the total 508 76% have been from the high caste group: Baun, Chetri, Thakuri, Rajput, Shrestha, and Yadav.